All right. Welcome back, everyone. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is actually the first episode of the Bearded Historian that we are putting on YouTube. Thanks, my man. Today is a very special day. This is, I think, the eighth episode now of the series over 5 years. Don't judge me. Uh, and with it, this is the second time I've ever had a guest on. And today I am thrilled to announce that we will be talking with my good friend, Lucius Seger. Lucius is a fourth year PhD candidate also at TCU. He did his undergraduate degree at,
Oh, I got it. It's
help me
Wright
out.
State.
Wright
Wright
State.
State
That's right.
University.
Wright
There you
State.
go.
Wright State. I know where he did his master's at, the University of
Yes.
Cincinnati.
Yes, I
And
do.
then he's been at Fort Worth, like I said, for the last 4 years. So, with that being said, he also studies here at Fort Worth or at TCU. His dissertation is on the populist movement in Texas during the late 19th century through the 20th century. So, Lucius, man, thanks for coming on. Glad to have you, buddy.
Yeah, glad to have you too. And don't feel bad about my undergrad. It's a everyone always makes the joke from where I'm at. That's the wrong it's a wrong state, right? Or right
Oh,
yeah, it's because
God.
it's right state. It's the right state, wrong university, right?
Well,
Because everyone
see,
thinks of Ohio State,
See, I was familiar with Wright State because, well, I mean, hell, you know this, knowing me, I'm a big college basketball fan, and like Wright State, I feel like maybe like once every like 10 years goes on like a little run in the tournament, right? Like they at least may like get out of the round of, I guess it's 68 now, the round of 68 and get into like the round of 32. So I'm kind of familiar with Wright State a little bit.
Yeah, we have occasionally good college basketball programs, at least on the men's side, and that's why I always have a grudge against Tennessee because our best team was beaten by them. I actually did. I actually skipped class to watch that game, and that was one of the few times I actually did that. So
No
I was
pun
a good
intended.
student in undergrad.
No pun intended, but rightfully so.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. A lot of puns in this podcast, which is good.
yeah,
But
starting off
anyway,
early.
I yeah, so I digress. Do you just want me to introduce myself and
Yeah, man. So,
okay.
so basically, kind of the first thing I have for you is, what really got you into history? Like, if you think back, going back to like your childhood or anything like that, like what really kind of drew you into history and where you're at now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I first of all, I kind of grew up I grew up in Ohio, right? I'm not a native Texan,
Mhm.
even though I studied Texas politics,
Yeah,
which is kind of funny. Um I think what really got me into history really had to do with my parents. And they were really, they both really pushed me and my sisters. I was the youngest of three.
yeah.
I was the only son
I
two sisters.
I know about being the
So
youngest. Yeah.
yes, yes. So I was the youngest, a little spoiled, but I basically what got me into history really was that my parents would talk a lot about history in front of of me and my siblings. And we traveled a lot when I was younger. We traveled a lot. We did all the, national monuments, national parks, right? I saw
Right.
things like Mount Rushmore when I was
Oh,
younger. Like
nice.
we traveled all around the US.
Yeah.
And so when you travel, it really helped me like understand a lot about like what was going on. And we would always make it an interest to do something educational, not just sort of like amusement parks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think it really had to do with my mom was a teacher, and so I was actually homeschooled growing up
Okay.
for until high school, and
Yeah.
so that really she had a love of history, and my dad has like a big like efficient. He's very much of a fan of things like World War II, looking at the battle. He knows like all the ships in the Pacific Theater. Like he could just recite it off memory,
Yeah.
right? And so it was kind of that environment that I grew up in that really pushed me to love history when I was growing up, and I really made it my own. So like I always have been sort of a very having this sort of I really want to know like this curiosity like I want to know more
Right.
about
For
this like
sure.
why is this, and it wasn't even just necessarily about like US history or like where I'm at, but like how the world was kind of the way it was, right?
Right.
And so that really got me into when I was younger, looking at I was super big into history. I did what I looked at a lot at when I was younger. I did things. It's called counterfactual history or alternative history.
Uh-huh.
I was big into that, into reading about it and how other people saw historical events. And so by the time I think I got into high school, um, it really was like clicking for me. Like I
Yeah.
did AP history and I really knew I wanted to go into it when I got a 5 on my AP European history test. So
Heck
that's really
yeah.
where my passion kind of emerged from history was really through my parents and my upbringing, I would say.
Dude, you're definitely smarter than me. There was no AP for Charles in high school. I can tell you that. The only AP there was in the alphabet, and that was now
What?
there was PE, but that was about
Yeah.
that's the closest to
Yeah, it was but hey, no, but we're both here, so
hey, that's it. That's
it's
it.
that everyone has the different path to get there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so unique, right? Is it like you never know what in life is going to actually like draw you in to
Mhm.
certain ideas and certain subjects. So, okay, so you take this AP class in high school, right?
Mhm.
You go off to Wright State.
Yep.
Uh, so we both know a little bit about how undergrad degree programs go, right? Like
Mhm.
you don't necessarily get to focus a whole lot on exactly what you want to do. It's more so undergrad history programs are more so about teaching you the basics. And by teaching you the basics, they give you kind of like set guidelines that you have to follow. Um, so were even at Wright State, did you have any idea that you would be now studying populist movements in Texas? Like, did those early ideas start to develop there, or was that more so like once you got on to Cincinnati?
It actually was to answer it shortly, and I'll expand upon it. It was really at Cincinnati where I actually learned populist.
Okay.
Actually, believe it or not, my capstone project
Yeah.
focused on the Great Dayton Flood, and looked at basically progressive era environmentalism. So, like,
Oh,
I
okay.
definitely have made a bit of a pivot. But like you were saying, I think so. I was a history major all through undergrad, right? Like, I know
Mm-hmm.
many people they change their majors and stuff, but I was just simply like always like liked history and like
Right.
I even added a minor in Spanish, so se habla español, and like midway through
It's working out
I
well
just
for you now.
yeah, it does. My partner would agree.
Yeah.
It so like basically like I kind of made like in the middle of my undergrad, I kind of did this whole Spanish minor thing, and then but I was still in the history. Like
Right.
I just had a passion for it,
Mm-hmm.
and in undergrad, it really I was able to get a lot of training. I was gonna say something about my undergrad. I really wanted to
Yeah.
highlight that.
Yeah. Go
So
ahead.
I can so Wright State, if the one person who maybe knows about it, but like you might not know about Wright State. It's a
Mm-hmm.
very small commuter school. So TCU, the
Yeah.
size of TCU is about under 15,000. So
Mm-hmm.
Wright State's about that size as a public university, right? It's a very
Yeah.
small university. It was actually founded in the 60s. It was separated from Miami of Ohio and Ohio State, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it basically was in a cornfield, right? Essentially. And Wright State was not that big. I mean, honestly, even when I went, it was small enough that you knew most of the people. Well, I mean, not all the people, but you knew if you were somewhat around and you were involved in stuff, you did know quite a bit of people. It was pretty
Mm-hmm.
easy to meet people. But
Yeah.
I think Wright State, being a small school, and a lot of people thinking of it as a commuter school, they kind of downplay or kind of undervalue the education. But the education I got at Wright State, the professors there were top notch, right? I remember in my let's see, was it junior? I think it was my junior year of undergrad. I will never forget this moment. But my he was so basically once you get and if you're a history major, once you get into undergrad, you go into something kind of like a historian's craft, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're learning about Chicago
Right.
style, you're learning about how to write it. And I will never forget this one moment. He's this professor, his name was Dr. Pollock. He was from, I believe, Harvard, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
a very, very smart guy, right? At
Yeah.
Wright State, right? And he one of our first classes, he basically was like, every one of you could have been at Harvard. Like, and every one of you is just as smart as these
Hmm.
kids over there or these students over there. And so that really stuck with me that, like,
Yeah.
even if I was at a smaller university, and this as well,
Yeah.
it doesn't really translate, it doesn't mean anything in terms of your ideas and what you can output. So I feel like that's one thing I really learned from my undergrad experience is just, and that's why I'm very proud of where I went to my undergrad. So,
No,
anyways.
man, I completely agree. And some of the people, if you're watching this or listening and you're kind of familiar with my journey, I mean, similar. I came from a very small, uh, well, population wise, it's bigger than TCU, but it was a very small,
Mhm.
community based university, University of West Florida, and so also a commuter school, just like you, and things like that. Very small department. Uh, but the lessons I learned from that department and the people I met there, I mean, those are still things that I carry with myself to this day. Um, I tell people all the time that I would not be sitting here if I hadn't chosen to go there. And it's true. I mean, my advisor there, Dr. Aaron Stone, who's now my boss, who is now also one of my closest friends, uh, you know, I I I owe her more than we have time for me to sit here and explain. And so I'm very grateful for everyone there. There's not a time that when I go back to Florida that I do not see them. I mean, it's my family in a lot of ways. It really is. It's my family. So I totally understand that. Uh, but your experience, kind of going into grad school, I would say is probably a lot different than what mine was. Mainly from the fact that I stayed at the same university for my graduate program, and you chose to, though in the same state, to go off to the University of Cincinnati. So, if you will, just tell me a little bit about like how that decision was or how it came about. What drew you to just Cincinnati? Were you looking anywhere else, and kind of what your experience like was, or was there at Cincinnati?
Yeah, I like that you highlighted that. I just want to touch upon to anyone listening, like with history degree, it does not matter where you can
Yes,
go and do great things. It doesn't matter where
100%.
you come from, and I like that message. I think what I was kind of getting back to with Wright State. So when I was about to finish my degree, I was in my senior year, right? And I really kind of was like, what do I do now, sort of thing.
Hmm.
I kind of always had the impression going in that I wanted to do some sort of graduate work. Even from the onset, I was like probably going to do and so I graduated in 4 years.
Yeah,
It wasn't easy. I had to work. I worked through college. It was
it's
I know
it's
you know how
grueling,
it is.
man. It's
I
grueling.
mean, it's hard, but I did
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
I was very proud of myself. But honestly, going into my senior year, I didn't really know where to apply because I kind of wanted to stay home, sort of
Mhm.
closer to home. I wasn't
Yeah.
quite wanting to kind of branch out, so I really looked at a lot more of the Ohio universities, like the big universities like Ohio State, University of Cincinnati, even Miami of
Hmm.
Ohio. Because Wright State didn't have much of a, I think they did have a master's program. I do remember taking classes with history, but it
Yeah.
was just not a big program.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was less than 10 people in the whole program. And I
That's
think it was
about
only
what
in
mine was.
yeah,
Yeah.
it
So I
was a
get it.
small program, no
Totally get it.
PhD, all MA,
Yeah.
right? And I was like, I didn't feel like it was the best in terms of if I wanted to do something more
Yeah.
broadly.
For
And
sure.
so, honestly, I'll be real with you. It was like I really only applied to one school. I mean, I literally applied to one school. That was Cincinnati, because I missed the deadline for Ohio State. I didn't know what I was doing. I honestly did it because no one's ever been in grad school, or my dad,
And all these schools are different, dude. Like all of these schools, like you'll see deadlines. Not to sidetrack us a little bit here, but since you brought it up, but like you'll see deadlines for some schools, they'll be like December 15th, and then I know for us at TCU, at least the year I applied, I can't speak for you. Mine was February 15th for TCU was the
Yeah,
deadline.
that was the same for
Like
TCU. Yeah.
like it was so far back, and so like it's crazy the different windows and how you have to juggle all that. So I can understand. Actually, I missed one too. I was going to apply at Ole Miss,
Oh, wow.
and I missed it by a day. Like
Are
I
you
was,
serious?
yeah, and because I had I think I had the wrong month down for it. It was
Oh.
something that like it was due like December 20th, and I think I had January 20th. And I went to go just submit it on December 21st because I got it done. I was like, I'm gonna submit it, get it in. And I missed it by date because I put the wrong like because I was using when I was researching different PhD programs I wanted to apply to, I
Mhm.
made like an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, smart.
And
That's smart.
so like with the deadlines, what all they needed, everything like that, right? And I must have just entered the wrong date for Ole Miss, and
Oh, no.
I never even sent it.
Wow,
So so
that
I get
yeah,
it.
so,
I get it.
yeah. I basically missed the deadline because I was like, I want to go to Ohio State because they got
Yeah.
like good political stuff. And like, oh, it's funny story, right? So this is my first year, my senior year, and so I had a good colleague of mine at Wright State who also was applying for Cincinnati as well. Good friends of mine, and he and I basically I remember in one of my classes, I'm like, oh yeah, I probably should apply, and so I looked at the requirements. This is actually a really funny story. And so to some grad programs require you to take the what is it? Some sort of I think
GRE?
it's the GRE, yeah, the GRE. God, I hated the GRE.
I never
And
took it.
so
Thank God.
it is so this is in December, by the way. This is in
Yeah.
December, by the way. Cincinnati's deadline is in January, right?
Hmm.
They need the GRE in for my application. So I basically spend much of the winter break cramming for the GRE, right? Cramming for it. This is not so if you ever have to take the GRE, don't do what I did. Most people take like 6 months to study, and I had to do it in like 3 weeks. And
Yeah.
I actually did really well on the writing and reading portions, which is another thing of the GRE, which thank goodness, because the math portion was like, oh, this is
Oof.
really bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you pass math? And so that was really, I think a funny part of my story is that like literally I was like, it was like that was it.
Right.
But the GRE scores were good enough. They got me in. They weren't crazy like perfect scores, but
It's
they were
all
good
right. We
enough.
don't need to
And
know.
no, yeah, we don't need to know. They were good, but uh, but it was good enough to get in, and they liked my whole package, and
Yeah.
and I did very and so that's how I got into Cincinnati, I guess. I know that's a long, winding way, but like, um, it was a very much just like a kind of was like if I always think about it, it's like it just was like it was kind of meant to be, and it worked
Uh-huh.
out because Dayton, Ohio, if people aren't familiar with Ohio, it's about an hour from Cincinnati, and so it
Yeah.
was I think within a reasonable
Right.
distance for my family and friends and stuff.
Yeah, because you didn't necessarily move to Cincinnati, right? Like you just drove from Dayton to
No,
Cincinnati.
I commuted an
Yeah.
hour. And if
Yeah.
anybody's familiar, I-75 is not exactly, and you might even know that I-75 is one of the most
Yeah.
congested highways in the US. And it was not easy, but I will say that it was rewarding. And I can
Right.
talk more. It probably will come in more when I talk more about that if you wanted to go into
Yeah. So
my
yeah.
time in
So
the Masters.
yeah. So you get to Cincinnati, and what's so kind of like what were some of the things you noticed from your like the step up, right, from undergrad to graduate? Like what was kind of the difference between the programs, between the work, scheduling, things like that?
Yeah, so honestly, you did a great, you hit it all right on the head with the whole it's a step up. That was
Yeah.
a culture shock for me. Like, because Cincinnati, I think recently, I know one of my family members actually goes to Cincinnati. I think it's 50,000 plus what they were telling me. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's huge.
That is it's night and day difference, right? This is an urban campus, right? So
Hmm.
Wright State is in a suburb of a small. Dayton's not exactly the biggest city in Ohio, right?
Hmm.
It's a small town,
Yeah.
right? And Cincinnati is like the three C's, right? If you go up I-71, there's three big cities: Cincinnati,
Cincinnati,
Columbus,
Columbus,
Cleveland.
Cleveland. Yep.
Yeah, it's the three C's. It's the only state that does that. If
Hmm.
anyone's interested, there are interesting videos on that, but I digress. But it was a lot. And the grad program was, these are like best and the brightest. Like there are
Right.
people in my program from Cal Berkeley, right? These are very, very smart people.
God, what a
And
culture shock.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Things like that. I think um it was really different, like adjusting to having a cohort, right? So in my undergrad, right, you knew people in the program, right? I had friends,
Yeah.
but like you're like intimately involved or around them. for much of the day while you're in classes, while you're
Right.
TAing. It becomes something I think akin of to sort of work colleagues and even friends. And so I made a lot more connections there.
Hmm.
But I will say that it was a lot. I didn't park in parking garages, and
Yeah.
dealing with rush hour traffic. And in Ohio, the weather can be bad. So if there was ice or whatever, it could be hour and a half to 2 hours.
Right.
So I think the logistics were difficult, but it also was a culture shock in terms of the step up. I actually was talking to one of my friends, a good friend of mine, and she's in a graduate program. And I said master's program. Honestly, it was more difficult for me to transition from undergrad to master's
Yeah.
than for high school to undergrad. So I don't know if you want me to talk more about that, but
Yeah.
that
No,
was
no, no. I get that too. I was like, there was an adjustment for me as well, but I don't think mine was as kind of difficult, mainly because I stayed at the same university. So like I knew what the professors expected. I knew everyone that was already coming into this cohort. So like yes, like the workload obviously was a little bit more of an adjustment, but it it wasn't as big of an adjustment for me. Like I think the master's program to the PhD was probably a bigger kind of adjustment personally for me, mainly because of the way that, and like not so much like the work, but mainly the way that the work was assigned and the way that TCU does certain things
Mhm.
with their classes and everything. So for me, that was kind of a big adjustment period, but I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It honestly is like it was like you were saying. Like I was in a different university. Like I didn't know these
Right.
professors. I remember my first class I had. He's a Civil War historian, Doctor Miller, I believe, and he was very. I was like, whoa, this guy knows his stuff. Like
Yeah.
I felt like it was one of those like small seminar rooms, and like no one's hiding from anyone, sort of. So you got
Yep.
to know your stuff going into these guys. So that's but it really helped me really get out of my like comfort zone, I would
Right,
say,
for
and
sure.
really communicate and have more of a working relationship with these professors, not just seeing them as you're the person who gives me like a 93 or an 87, right? No,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
seeing them as like, hey, these are people who can help me out. And I got so much good writerly advice from these people at Cincinnati.
Yeah.
People like Dr. Gasser. Like I still
Mhm.
remember her advice to me, like, to improve my writing. And it like really helped me to really
Right.
form sort of these things that I think in grad school really you start to hone in on,
Hmm.
like your topic, right? Things like that, like
Yeah.
like honestly, these are things I never thought of in undergrad. I'm like, I just like history, but now it's like, okay, you like history, but like, what can you do with it, right? You need
Right.
to like explain yourself and have your own sort of writing.
Now, if I remember correctly from conversations we've just had in the
Yeah,
past,
sure.
uh, your thesis had to do with some type of populist stuff in Texas as well, and that's what's kind of led you down this path that you're at now at TCU.
Yes, yes, that is correct. So I can go into the story of how it came
Yeah.
to be because it's kind of
Yeah.
wild. So
Please do.
honestly, going into masters, I'm not kidding. I wanted to do some sort of work on like religion and race. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I was kind of like they, they were like a lot of people, and I felt really discouraged. I feel like my first semester because a lot of people like they seemed like they knew what they were like. Moment A, they were like, these are master's students, and like, this is what my PhD is going to be like in 6 years. And I'm like, I'm just like, trying to figure it out for myself. So I felt like I really in one of my classes that I had on the South, I bumped into this guy. His name's Tom Watson, right? He's this
Hmm.
populist leader, right? I didn't really know much about the populist, right? I wasn't, it was a very much of a footnote movement to me,
So,
and
real quick, if you will, for people
yeah.
who may not know, can you explain just briefly like what the populist is, if
Yes,
you don't mind?
exactly. And so this is actually really interesting. And I mean, populism is now such a buzzword in our
Hmm.
culture today. I'm clearly, I think people know of what populism is, but they don't know what the Populist Party is, right?
Yeah.
Or at least they have ideas on what populism is. So the
Right.
Populist Party essentially, I guess to boil it down, was so in the late 19th century, it was a group of predominantly farmers and also laborers in places like the West, and they formed this
Hmm.
third party political movement. They advocated because in a lot of ways, farmers were struggling financially after Reconstruction
Right.
with paying off their farms. They were falling into cycles of debt. They were becoming tenant farmers. They were, and so not only that, but the U.S. was financially struggling at this time. The U.S. was trying to go onto the gold standard, right? And get off of silver, right? And so
Yeah.
there was this big push. These farmers believed that by taking this currency out of circulation, that it was really hurting their bottom line, right? It gave there was less money in and less money that farmers could pay off their debt. You also have the Gilded Age, right? The Gilded Age, as everyone says, it's really important to understand. And I try to tell my students this. The Gilded Age was really important because there was this massive economic inequality, right? Massive
Right.
economic inequality. And these farmers really felt like the system was not fair, right? The system was not fair. And so these populists also believed that the political parties were basically in cahoots with these sort of big
Mhm.
businesses, right? And they believed there was a conspiratorial sort of element towards that was preventing sort of these ideas that kind of date back to Lincoln and Jefferson and this sort of principle of this sort of independent human farmer. But I
Mhm.
also try to remind people, and I think there's a big misconception. People think the populists were a backwards facing movement, right? They wanted to sort of return to the glory ages. They
Right.
actually really weren't. They wanted to advocate for education of farmers, right? I've heard people say that they didn't, but they did. They wanted there to be scientific methods of crops. They wanted there to be agricultural universities, right? Things like A&M. If you see
Hmm.
Texas A&M and you're like, what's
Yeah.
the A&M? That's part of agricultural, right?
Right.
They believed that there should be reforms in society, right? They believed in things like direct election of senators, graduated income tax, right? A lot of them supported women's suffrage, right? So they were actually in the forefront of basically progenitors to the progressive era movement.
Yeah.
So in short, that's kind of I can go on and on about the part,
Yeah.
but they basically were a third party political movement. They were reformist in an age where it wasn't really the thing, and so they formed their party. And I can keep going on, but one of the things about the populists that was also unique was in the South after Reconstruction, the civil rights amendments, the 14th and 15th amendments that gave African Americans, citizenship and right to vote, were being kind of gradually kind of suppressed by white Democrats. And so by the time you get to the 1890s, African Americans really don't have a lot of rights, and you have these development of what we now call Jim Crow, right? And so African American farmers, many of whom still had the right to vote, right? And I think
Right.
that's a misconception about Reconstruction. So Reconstruction, it wasn't like in 1876 it just all ended, and it was this, but it was a very slow, gradual process
Yeah.
until the 1890s. So essentially, basically, the populists were this third party political movement, and they have tried to appeal to a wide variety of people, including African Americans in the South. And so,
Hmm.
getting back to how I came to my topic,
Yeah.
so Tom Watson, he was a Georgian. Populist, right? He becomes this sort of major orator to try to have these sort of racial reconciliation, right, between African Americans and white
Right.
farmers, particularly because there was in the South, white Democrats were trying to use sort of this racial rhetoric to make sure that no other political movements would emerge. Right?
Hmm.
There was this sort of idea that if you would allow African Americans to vote, and if you voted with them, you would sort of betraying the sort of racial hierarchy that's forming. Right? But a lot of white farmers didn't see it like that, right? And so that really opened my eyes that there were some that were like, I don't have any problem with the guy across the street because I'm struggling, right? And so not all populists, but there was a significant amount that really tried to push for racial equality, or at least some forms of it, right? At
Right.
least economic and political, right?
Hmm.
And so what drew me was like I was like, this is really fascinating. This seems to kind of contradict what I kind of thought of the
Yeah.
South at this time. And so I wanted to learn more about the movement. And so that really got me into what I did in my master's thesis, if you want me to elaborate on that.
Yeah. So so you began looking at these movements across the South.
Mhm.
So your thesis, it was more so the movements across the South, right, and not so much Texas based as your dissertation is now, or
So that's how I found out my topic. So I focused on I okay, so I found the populist. I want to do it on populism, right?
Right.
And I'm like, what state can I do it on, right?
Ah,
So
so you chose Texas.
in Texas. So Texas had like I think maybe I can't remember if it's maybe the second or the third most populist vote share, right?
Yeah.
Texas elected even members to, or they almost elected members to Congress, and the populism movement was very strong in Texas. I'm like, okay, I'll do that, and I'm like, and then when I talked to my advisor, my second year, right? I was like, okay, I want to do populism, right, in Texas, right? This big whole grand thing for my master's thesis. And he's like, you need to pick like some sort of locality to do this
Hmm.
analysis on, right? And so I ended up choosing a county called Cass County, which is in East Texas. And so I
Hmm.
was like, let me just trace the movement of the populace, right, from their rise, from their fall, why they emerged, what's going on here, right? And I really was trying to look at a lot of the race relations and how the politics of that really influenced sort of these larger pictures, right? So
Yeah.
in essence, it was a county study trying to, and that was what I did my master's thesis
So
on.
very kind of local micro history type
Yeah, I would
study of this
say, yeah,
county.
it was very much like that, and it
Yeah.
also I think had to do a lot with when I wrote my master's thesis. So I
Yeah.
I wrote it during the pandemic, right? And
Yeah.
so that was not fun because in 2020, the archives for a lot of people were shut down.
Shut down. Yeah.
So I got very lucky that I lived in 2020, not 2000 or
Hmm.
1990 or something like that, because I don't
Yeah.
think I would have been able to do what I did because
Right.
newspapers.com. And I honestly was just very grateful for I had local historians in Cass County that just sent me. I had this one guy, he just sent me all of this information about the county, everything that
Yep.
he's researched. And so that basically allowed me to do that project. So I'm
Right.
very grateful for those people.
Yeah. No,
That
those,
that worked.
obviously I kind of had the same experience. I mean, mine was kind of coming out of the back end of COVID 2021 through 2022. But still, I mean, there were tons of different things that I wasn't able to go and see because, I mean, hell, even the majority of archives, they didn't start opening back up until like 2022. Even through 2021, they were closed. But thank God for websites like Family Search. It had a lot of, a lot of the records from Reconstruction because that's what
Awesome.
my thesis was
Yep.
on. So thank God for the websites like that that had a bunch of those records because, like you said, had we been trying to do this in shoot, probably even 2010, I mean, it would
Yeah,
have
no way.
been damn near impossible to do it then. So, so all right, so you finish your thesis, graduate, walk across the stage, or you're on the verge of walking across the stage, I
Yeah.
should say. And now it's time to once again for application season.
Yeah.
And so what was that process like? Like trying to decide where you wanted to apply, and then ultimately the schools that accepted you, and ultimately making the decision to come to Fort Worth and come to TCU.
Yeah, that's a good question. So honestly, like I really enjoyed my writing my thesis, right? But it was hard, but I did it, and
Yeah.
I was really proud of myself. So it was the second year, the first semester of my second year is when I really started to think, did I want to do this again? And
Uh-huh.
honestly, because this was 2020, right? Fall 2020, right? And everything was going on around the world, and I kind of was burnt out, and a lot of people at my program were also very burnt out because we
Yeah.
were online. Like there was no classes, no period. End of story, right? Everything was online, digital, which is fine, but like it really was like hard to have that sort of isolation and
Yeah.
doing your work and having to grade other people's work. And
No,
I
I
was
get
I
it.
just remember I was just in my room and just, oh my gosh, just writing away, right, right, right. So I
Yeah.
kind of was like, I remember talking to one of my good friends, good colleague, he's still at Cincinnati. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, I want to take a gap year, or at least take a gap year and like, I'll figure it out later. And he's like, no, you need to apply for universities because you're like really smart and you got to go for it. Don't take a year off if you don't have to. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
fine. I probably should, I should keep going, right?
Right.
I think it's going to get better. COVID's going to, eventually, hopefully it'll become lesser. And so I applied. I really felt like I needed to apply to Texas schools because I did Texas work, right?
Right.
And so I really thought of a variety of Texas schools. The three big ones I thought of in Texas were Texas Christian, obviously, Texas Tech, and University of Texas Austin were the three big ones. I also applied to Cincinnati. It's kind of a bit of a hey, I know this
Fallback type
school.
thing.
It was something,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But I also was thinking about other people I wanted to work with. I think Georgia Tech was one of the universities I was really interested in working with, Dr. Matthew Hill there, and so there was a lot of these schools that I was trying to think about when I do that process, and so as I am applying, I ended up applying for three schools. I narrowed it down to TCU, Tech, and Cincinnati. Right. So actually, Cincinnati was the only one that didn't accept me. Right. And they did accept me. So like they did accept me, but I remember talking to their director. He called me and he's like, "There's nobody really that does what you do here. So we
Yeah.
honestly feel like it's the best interest for you not to do it." And I'm like, fair enough. I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't disagree. Like I was like, okay. I mean,
I mean,
works for me.
at least he told you that, because I can imagine there's some schools out there that would have just said, please just come, and we'll
Yeah,
make it
I'm
work.
glad they didn't sell me a false bag of goods, right? Because
Right,
that would have been really terrible for me.
right, right.
I think so. It went down to Tech and TCU, right? And so I applied to both. I got accepted into both. So at TCU, I got accepted with a full ride. And
Hmm.
Tech, I got accepted, but I didn't have financial backing. I had to wait until April for them to
Hmm.
know or not know. And so basically, it in TCU, I honestly wanted to
And
work with.
for also, just
Oh,
don't mean to stop you. For anyone
no,
who doesn't know, uh, when you get a funding package, either with, or you get an offer, I should say, from a master's or PhD program, you have until April 15th to say yes or no. So waiting till April to figure out what the funding package could be is not necessarily ideal. But anyways,
yeah,
keep
yeah,
going.
no, no. I think it's on tax day too, which is kind of funny. I
Yeah,
don't know if
yeah,
that's an
it is.
irony to it.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, no, no.
which
If
I
you're
still need to
applying,
do, by the way.
me too. Grad students, right?
Yeah.
But like I I think that's one thing, just like this tangent, like, with your applying for grad schools, make sure you know the deadlines, but also don't sell yourself short if a school isn't going to give you funding
Oh yeah, don't
or
go anywhere that you're not getting funding.
yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah. Don't sell yourself short.
no,
And don't wait until, well, unless you have,
unless you have to.
preferably unless you have to. I would say have the decision sort of closer to
Right.
the time you get accepted, as
Yeah.
soon as you can. And so I got accepted into TCU and Tech, and so TCU gave me a better package. Just a long story short, they gave me a better package, and also it helped because my dad also lives in the Fort Worth
Hmm.
area. I had some family connections. I have cousins who live in Dallas area, and so I kind of I grew up. I'm a big college football fan. We probably have. It's probably insinuated that we both like college sports, and so
Yeah.
I remember watching Andy Dalton. Like I'm a big Bengals fan, right? Like
Right.
I like TCU, and I'm like, okay, I'll give it a whirl, and I was ready in 2021 for to move somewhere different. I feel like, and it
Yeah.
was going to be closer to my research. So that's
Right.
how I kind of decided on TCU. And it was funny because we actually didn't walk across the stage. We actually,
I
it was
know.
COVID, so we just all at Cincinnati Stadium, we all got onto the the field and we just threw our caps in the air, and then that was it.
At least y'all had that,
COVID
dude.
policies. It was yeah.
At least y'all had that. We didn't even have.
Are
Now,
you
granted,
serious?
like
Yeah.
my undergrad, so the one that got screwed up for me was my undergrad
Uh huh.
graduation, but that was also like in the heat of it. Like that was the same
Oh.
year of the spring break that no one ever came back from.
Oh, I remember that
And
year.
so
Yep.
like 2020, like,
Yeah, it's 2020 smack. Oh,
the whole thing just got canceled completely.
dang.
Yeah, sucks, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. At least I
Uh,
got to graduate. I got to throw my hat in the air and do it.
right.
But that's essentially how I got to TCU. That's
Yeah,
essentially my thought process behind it. But
right.
yeah.
So you get to TCU, move out to Fort Worth, uh, start things at TCU. Kind of like what was your experience like? Well, I guess I should say your first year. Every other year after that, I kind of know already, but everyone else may not. So like
Yeah.
what's your experience been like at TCU and things like that?
It's been overall really good, but I will say that there is a definite culture shock for me. I came from public universities, right? PCU is a
Yeah,
private
I'm
university. It's a
there
very
with you.
small, so it's a different. So I felt when I first walked on the campus, I'm like, oh wow, this is like really different from what I experienced, right? Like I did
Yeah.
not. it's just very different, but
Right.
it's not. It wasn't bad, but it was just like this is like unique, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm also like I've never lived in I'd never lived in a city before, right?
Yeah.
I commuted to my master's,
Right.
so it was definitely that was unique about TCU being in. Well, it's kind of like sort of kind of in Fort Worth, but it's
Mhm.
part of it. But like Fort
Right.
Worth's big, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into that, but it's that. And so I think that when I started taking classes, I think to piggyback on something you said earlier in the conversation, you said about how the differences between your masters at West Florida and
Yeah.
TCU, it was different in the way so at Cincinnati, we didn't have as many research seminars.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who don't know, like research seminars are like focused on like crafting sort of a unique research in 3 months, basically on whatever topic that's usually it's on like U.S. history or military
Yeah.
history or something like that, right? And so I wasn't used to there being this many like research classes, right, and opportunities to do that. And so my first year, I really I went really like, oh man, let's do two research seminars off the bat, and I'm like,
Wow.
whoa, I realized why you don't do that. And then
And then
when
you
I'm
just
like
did it
midway through,
again.
yeah, and I did it again. So it's like I don't learn, It's like not the Pavlov's bell,
Yeah.
It's pretty funny, but I it was different in that way, and I think also it was like really like there's some really cutting edge historians here at TCU, and
Yes.
it really helped me to be like, whoa, it really like I was like, I gotta, this is like another step up, this is pretty cool. I mean, Cincinnati was good, but like TCU is also really, really good. And so I did not know what to expect. Like it was a kind of a bit of a leap of faith, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really know anything besides my advisor, honestly. And I was just like, well, let's see how it goes. And I mean, it was hard, but I feel like once I got the hang of it, it became more manageable in terms of
Yeah,
workload.
for
I
sure.
also my first year I did I was very blessed to be able to get an award that allowed me not to have to do TA work.
Right.
So that also allowed me more time to focus on my classes
Mm-hmm.
and really hone in on my writing skills and such, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, like I said, I completely agree. The differences. So like when I was at UWF, we had research classes, but it was never something to the extent of like what we do at TCU, which is where on day one we pick a topic, and then on the last day we're expected to kind of have almost an article based ready paper.
Hmm.
Uh, at UWF, it was more so you kind of gradually worked up there, maybe 15, 20 pages,
Hmm.
is what you would write. Where here, I think the expectation is at the minimum 30 and probably should damn near be closer to 40. So that was a lot different for me. We also didn't have like dedicated reading classes, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
And so we would read books, but it wouldn't be like how our reading seminars now are, where we had like a book a week. Like it would be
Oh, okay.
like a lot of these things were intertwined too. So like
Mhm.
while you're working on the research paper for this class, you're also reading books for this class. So it wasn't like they were pulled apart kind of differently. So that was kind of a big transition for me,
Mhm.
like when I first got to TCU, um, and kind of just trying to figure out that load and everything. But so so now you're through coursework.
Mhm.
You are what we consider ABD, which for anyone who doesn't know what that stands for, it means all but dissertation. And so you're working on your dissertation right now, yes, as we both are, thank God. And so how has this project changed now from where it was from this county outlook, this East Texas county
Mhm.
that you were looking at in your thesis? Where is this project at now? And kind of what's that process been like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, it's changed a lot. I'm no longer doing a county line.
Yeah,
So I did come into it originally being like, hey, maybe I can just like really parse this out. Because as you know, and I mean, we've read books that are like micro histories. They're just fantastic, that are
yeah,
just like, they tell you a lot. And they're just like one little
but they
county.
can be hard to do. They can be
Yeah.
very
And
hard
that's
to do.
that's the challenge. And honestly,
Yeah.
it's one of those things. I had people question. I remember when I was doing my master's, I'm like, okay, so what, sort of thing, like well,
Yeah.
how do you? It can be very difficult to do that. So I was like, okay, let me do like more of a statewide thing, right? And
Right.
so I started to really look at sort of populism and some of the effects of it in terms of the politics behind Texas, right?
Hmm.
And in the era, I really started to gravitate towards like how race relations and how politics really affects that. So that really got me into really because in my master's thesis, I actually did there was a mob violence or an occurrence of lynching in the county, and I talked about that, and I really tried to. I was very interested and intrigued when when there was this sort of backlash towards the governor for trying to sort of punish these people, these mob members, right? And
Hmm.
so I'm like, okay, it was in my back of my head. But when I came into my program and I kind of was like, okay, what do I want to do? How do I want to build on this sort of populism? How do I want to
Yeah.
build on this era? I started to look for sort of these political angle of populism, and I really why it maybe declined in some ways. And I was interested when I came upon information about Texas having one of the first southern states to pass like an anti-lynching law in the 1890s. Which I thought was kind of odd because at least initially because I'm like okay I don't think that they passed anything like this is I'm not
Right.
used to this, right?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so I as I kind of started to gravitate towards that, I started to really kind of parse through how the politics played a big role in why how mob violence was perpetrated, if it was punished or not punished, and
Hmm.
why this was kind of perpetrated throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, right? And I was really looking at how these sort of political, how these legislation are created or not created, right? And why did it fail? Like, why was there like still lynching after this law, right? Why does it not pass, right? Why did it fail to accomplish its goals? So a lot of my work, I really saw that there being a gap in the historiography. We call it intervention if people don't
Yeah.
know. They're really, if you ever go to grad school, they'll be like, what's your intervention? I don't know
Yeah.
what the intervention is, right? And so don't worry if you can't, but it's like once you like I started reading more and more and people, which is not bad, but people mostly talk about lynching in terms of sort of Ida B. Wells and the sort of spectacle nature of it, the cultural elements
Hmm.
to it, which is good, understanding why it happened in this that sense. But a lot of people, I feel like there's not as much information on the political sense, like
Right.
what was anti lynching politics like? How did African Americans, how did they view it? How did they fight against it, even in the 1890s, right?
Hmm.
And so these are things that really haven't been explored on the state level, really, to a large degree, right?
Right.
And so I think that really drew me to my project, and it was. So I really want to stress this to like people out there, maybe that came in with PhD with one idea, and you kind
Yeah.
of a little bit like this,
Yeah.
and you come out with another idea. It's not that it's like it could be very hard to like untether myself from the county. Like I grew to like really like be invested in trying to
Yeah,
get
for
that
sure.
published. But I think one of the things I really like about TCU is that I've had advisors and professors really push me to really develop these ideas and to really showcase like to really to like move your project to something that you can write a dissertation about. That's unique and that's
Exactly.
going to be something that's good. So anyway, that's a long story short, but that's how I kind of transitioned because it's a bit of a like it was like a bit of a change, but honestly, I don't feel
Hmm.
like the trajectory was much. I don't see it as much of a off the wall
How's
thing.
the research and writing process been going for you? And kind of like what's all that like? Like, has it been, we were talking earlier about your thesis and how it was a little more difficult then because a lot of archives were shut down, but now fast forward to early parts of 2025 where we're at now, things are more open, more readily available. Uh, so what's that whole process been like as you're kind of going through it?
It's been better, like you said, because of like coming here, not having as many sort of restrictions as I had my master's degree, where I was like,
Yeah,
number one, I was 1,000 miles away from what I was researching, right? And
right.
so, and number two, you had like this global pandemic, right? And so,
Yeah,
and I wasn't the only person. Like, everyone had their own, like, had to deal with that. But I
yeah.
think One of the things, number one, a lot of my research, my methodology, as we say, which is basically the way you go about doing your research, like,
We
what you
love fancy
use.
words as
I know,
historians.
like
So
honestly, it just makes these. Is it a 50 cent word? We always love as historians to have all these jargony terms, but
yeah,
essentially, it's like how you what do you use to write your sources? Because that really
right,
dictates what you're going to write about, right?
right.
And my research primarily focuses a lot on obviously legislative records, right? Like the good thing is Texas has digitized all of them and it's all publicly available. You don't no paywall, no firewall, no nothing. So that's great. And also things like newspapers.com.
Yeah.
And there are other sources. It's called the Portal to Texas History, right? They're run by the University of North Texas, which is actually locally in the area. It's a
Yeah.
little north of Fort Worth, if anyone's familiar. And so they have this digital database. They have a lot of newspapers, a lot of African American newspapers that I'm using, a lot of small
Mhm.
town newspapers that I'm using. They help complement what I'm doing. I also a lot of my work. I go down to Austin a lot, right? I am very familiar, at least with downtown Austin. I don't know if I could tell you any more than that, but I've done a lot of research at the I've done a lot of research at the it's called TSLAC, which is a
hmm
fancy acronym for the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. So essentially, obviously, Austin's the capital of Texas. So you have this big old capitol, big old rotunda. I've been inside, like it's just it's like whoa,
Yeah.
big old. It's just like everything's bigger in Texas, like right. It's a big building, so it's like across from the Capitol, right? And so it's like massive Greek columns, these massive building, and you walk in, you feel like an ant. And so a lot of the governor's records are in governmental records are all there. They're not digitized, which is so I have to go down there to Austin and I read through governor's correspondence, right? These are
hmm
people writing to the governor, right? But
Yeah.
there's a lot of good information there. And the problem is it's not organized. It's only by date. So
hmm
that's the challenge in my research is really getting down to Austin and going and doing that research, right?
Right.
And so that's really essentially that's most of my methodology, right? Those are
Mhm.
the main components of it, at least in terms of what I do with my primary sources like the
Yeah.
academic.
So let's let's talk about the future just for a minute. So
Okay.
let's say you get this thing done, you become Dr. Seeker.
Mhm.
Uh what's the end goal with this project? Like if somebody was to pick this thing up when it's done and they read it, what's kind of like the one message that you want them to take away from it that, that that you want them to take away from it after they get done reading it?
Okay. So like the message from my dissertation,
Yeah, like
or book or whatever it
yeah,
turns into.
book, manuscript, whatever it ultimately ends up turning into.
I think one of the things that I try to get I want to get across is that there were um a lot of people feel like things are they're just destined to happen, right? It was just this is how
Yeah.
the South was going to be, right? And I'm trying to say that it was sort of a complicated story on why lynching became a thing, why it became racial, like this whole how race relations worked, right? And I really want people to know that it wasn't just simply that people were like didn't do anything and just threw their hands up and be like, it's just what it is, right?
Mhm.
I think it's one of the things is I really like to look at how everyday people, African Americans, also but white allies as well, fought for anti-lynching legislation, even when it wasn't popular, right? And so it didn't work, but just because something doesn't work doesn't mean it's not worthy of being studied, right?
Right.
And so I think that into the public sphere, I would hope to get across with my research.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. All right, man.
Hopefully
Well,
that answered it.
yeah, no, dude. That's great. Well, man, I want to thank you for coming on here, talking to me, sharing all your information, all your research. Uh, I'm extremely excited to see where this project goes. Obviously, I'll be able to be here through the end of it, so I can't wait to see it's done. Do you have like a tentative title for it or anything yet?
Um, I am still working on that temporarily, but
Yeah.
I'm playing around with some. I think one of them is like the Ghastly Oaks Burden or something. Like
Okay.
I'm playing around with some quotes that are not just
Yeah.
like anti-lynching politics in Texas, right? Which is like okay,
hmm
that's not real like sexy, right?
Right.
That's not real like entertaining. But or like I just try to. I'm not worried so much about the title. I think that's one of the things they teach us in grad school. If you don't know, they're just like, titles, don't worry about it so much. But no, I haven't, not yet,
See,
unfortunately.
I always try to have like a catchy title. Like I
Hmm.
always titles are big to me. Like I always try to think of a catchy one. And like I think I have a good one for mine. But part of me also, because for anyone who's not aware, like when you finish your dissertation and then you turn it into a book, like it's
Hmm.
totally two different things. Like it's not like you're taking these printouts of this Word document and sending it off to a publisher and they're publishing it and it's going out to the world. Like it's like you make revisions, you change, you probably gonna add some stuff to it. So it's a totally different thing. So with that comes a totally different new title as well. And so
Mm.
like part of me wants to like I'm thinking about maybe saving it for when it does eventually turn into the manuscript for me. But I don't know. I may use it now because generally when it comes to publishing, you don't have a whole lot of say in the title anyways. It's the publishing company that ends up coming up with the title. So I may just use it
Yeah.
for the dissertation. We'll see.
Yeah, they don't a lot of publishing companies it's like these are four or five and we're gonna just kind of choose whichever one we think.
Yeah,
That's kind of how it
yeah,
goes. If people don't know about how publishing works, but that's a whole other conversation that,
yeah.
I'm
Maybe we
hopefully gonna
get
learn more about,
yeah, maybe
in
we'll
the
get into
future.
that into another day.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
But Lucius, man, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
For anyone who, like I said, if this is your first time listening, please like, comment, subscribe. This is going to be the first video that we've done on YouTube. Like I've said, I'm not entirely sure if every video will be on YouTube, but anytime I have such an esteemed guest here, those will ultimately always find their way onto YouTube. So with that, I bid everyone a good day, and I will see y'all next time. Thanks for
Have a
listening,
good
everybody.
one. Thanks for letting me on, Charles.
Right.